I don't have a car, so Uber or Lyft is my main mode of transportation to get to work. This morning, I requested an Uber about a half an hour before I had to be there, and the pickup was supposed to take less than 5 minutes. But for some reason, my Uber driver kept going in circles. He ended up calling me asking for directions, and I was telling him exactly where he needed to be, and so was the GPS in the background. At that point, I was irritated and asked if there was a way he could cancel because I was going to be late. He said that he couldn't, and he ended up finding his way to my apartment at the same time I was supposed to be at work. He kept apologizing and I would just mumble, "It's fine, I just really need to get there." He ended up taking me to another store that was on the way, and then asked,
"This is it, right?"
It literally took all of me not to blow up. I calmly gave him the directions to the actual store I work at, and just told him to please listen to the GPS. We finally get to my job and I'm nearly 20 minutes late, and as soon as he parked, I muttered thanks, got out, and bolted to the office to clock in. About an hour or so into my shift, one of my managers came up to tell me that my Uber driver has been harassing the people in front of the store and trying to get a hold of me and my manager to take fault for me being late and also apologize to me. You need a membership to shop there, so he kept getting kicked out. He actually tried on 4 to 5 separate times to come in. Another hour goes by, and a different manager approached me to let me know that the Uber driver had resorted to blowing up the store's phone, begging to speak to me. She had asked me not to leave alone and definitely be on the lookout in case he came back. I contacted Uber support multiple times to let them know that this happened, and do you want to know what they did about it? They gave me a $3 credit. I made sure to give him a 1 star so I wouldn't get him as a driver ever again, but it's just really scary to think that he knows where I work and live now. After this, I'm pretty creeped out to continue using Uber. About 4 years ago, I was a line cook at a restaurant that was located in a hotel. I worked at this restaurant for nearly 2 years, with no problem walking the half-mile or so distance that it took for me to reach the bus to get home from my job. This restaurant had a partnership with the hotel for late-night room service, so pretty much every night after closing the restaurant, 1, sometimes 2 line cooks would stay until after 3 a.m. preparing simple things like salads, sandwiches, and wraps that would then be taken to the rooms via hotel employees. Now, me being a recent college grad in my early 20s, would always volunteer myself for the extra hours. As I said prior, I had worked this job for a decent amount of time with no problems. That is, except for one rainy night I'll never forget. As I left my work that morning, around 3 a.m., I realized that I messed up when I forgot an umbrella that day. I now had to make my normal walk under decent rainfall. After lighting a cigarette and putting in my headphones, I was ready to make my unfortunate journey. I started on my normal routine walking back, cutting through the alleyways that I had memorized as my shortcuts through the city. About halfway through my walk, a car started following next to me with the passenger window down. Aware of my surroundings, I had recognized this, but decided to mind my business and keep my head down and keep walking. Growing up in a rough neighborhood taught me better than to put my nose where it doesn't belong. Unfortunately, that wasn't enough. Over the music coming from my headphones, I could hear shouting coming from the car. I turned to face the driver, but didn't stop walking. He looked back at me, a white man in his late 30s, early 40s, with a bandana and sunglasses on. I remember thinking that it's pretty odd he was driving with sunglasses so late in the night.
"Hey man, where you heading?"
I could hear him say. At this point, I took out one earbud and then replied, "What's it to you?" To which he answered,
"I figured I'd ask. You look like you need a ride to get out of the rain."
I told the guy I'm all set and that I was almost at my destination. Now, keep in mind I'm still walking and he's driving very slowly next to me on this side street at 3 a.m.
No problem.
He replied.
Do you smoke, man?
He asked. At this point, I was getting pretty annoyed with the guy. I had just gotten done working 13 hours in the kitchen, and all I wanted to do was listen to some music and unwind before bed. Nah, man, I don't. Even though I do, I replied in a stern and obviously annoyed tone. He just looked at me, almost like he knew that I was full of crap. I then said to him, "Have a good night," before replacing my earphone back into my ear and taking a right up a one-way side street, losing him in the process. I arrived at my bus stop safely and with about 10 minutes to spare. I was the only one there besides one other man and a homeless man sleeping on a bench some ways up. After about 3 minutes, that car pulls up to the side of the curb, directly in the bus lane. This time, however, I'm now facing him. He rolled down the window.
You're heading to the south side, huh?
He said. I replied, "How do you know?" He pointed above me. I looked up. On the digital board it says the next bus destination and time.
You want to lift there? I'm actually heading that way,
he said. At this point I was all set and the hood just came right out of me. "Hey man, I don't know you and I don't want to ride with you, so screw off," I said angrily. He just stared at me again, but this time I stared back. We then locked eyes for a good 20 seconds before the bus approached behind him honking loudly. The guy checked his rearview mirror, rolled up the window, and then sped off. On the way home, I remember looking behind me and my surroundings just to make sure that this creep didn't try to follow me home. Luckily he didn't, and when I got off the bus, I got into my apartment safely and sound within about 5 minutes. Fast forward about a week. One of my buddies who I work with asked me if I had heard about the body that the cops found in a dumpster behind the grocery store, less than 5 minutes from the hotel. I replied no. He then told me that the body of a girl was found strangled to death, and cops are on the lookout for the suspect. The cops had no evidence and were asking for people to come forward with additional information. Now, I hadn't told my buddy or anyone else besides my girlfriend at the time what happened that night. When I told him my story, he insisted that I call the cops and tell them what happened. I told him I would, but I never did. Call me old school, but like I said earlier, I learned growing up to mind my business and to avoid trouble, and trouble won't find me. So that's what I did. Till this day, I haven't heard anything more on the case. I wonder if it was the same guy. I think about how weird it was for him to approach me the way he did at such an odd hour of the day. The sunglasses, the following me to the bus stop, that stuff doesn't normally happen, right? After that experience, I started walking home with my paring knife in my pocket and walked with only one earphone in the whole time so that I could hear my surroundings better. I also stopped volunteering for the overnight shift. I really hope whoever did that to that girl gets caught, or at least has a change of heart. It's pretty crazy just how fragile life really is. Be careful out there. My grandma is a really big road rager, and she likes to cuss, flip off, and pull around people all the time. It's gotten better in her later years, but this was in 2014, I believe. My grandma didn't tell my grandpa and I this story until it happened. Before we get into that, here's some background on how I knew the mom and kids. The mom was so sweet. I was in her son's class in elementary, and I walked past her all the time on the way to buses while she was waiting for my classmate. I also had daycare with all 3 of the kids. I can't say that I met her boyfriend or ever saw him since I was so young and was in my own world playing with friends, but once while walking past her, she asked if I knew where my classmate was, since he was running late, and I just stood next to her and played with her youngest while she waited until I almost missed the bus. So back to the incident. My grandma's a really big road rager on her way back from work, mostly because of rush hour. She was going around a roundabout, and there was a car behind her that kept honking and riding on her bumper. She finally got sick of it because she was focused on trying to get around this new roundabout and honked her horn for a few seconds while at a stop and flipped the car off. She watches this guy in the mirror as he gets out of the car and then cracks his knuckles while speed walking up to her car. He's cussing her out, and she recognized the look on his face from past incidents with not too nice men that she had known before. She was on her own though. Her car required her to manually lock the doors and trunk and roll up the window. She basically said screw it and sped around the stopped cars that were in front of her and got off the roundabout. About a month later, they're watching the news while I'm in my room and my grandparents start talking. My grandpa yells for me, so I get up and go back to the room. "Don't you know this kid?" my grandpa asked, and I nodded, feeling confused and wondering if something happened to him. My grandpa plays the news story. "Do you know this mom?" The news told the whole story of how the man strangled her to death, and also posted pictures with the caption that read,
If you don't believe me, watch the Washington News Channel at about 5. Her son will be home then.
It was the oldest son that discovered her nude and dead. I had a few interactions with him before because of daycare, and my entire heart just hurts now just thinking about it. My grandma sat up when they showed the boyfriend's face, and then we realized it. It was the same man that was in the car behind her. Even I recognized him. That was when my grandma told us the whole story, and just thinking about it sends shivers down my entire body. He could have been slowly breaking just then, and that's why I raged out like he did. I'm just so happy my grandma got out of the roundabout when she did. I'm not saying that he would have hurt my grandma, but he was already an abuser to women. So who's to say he wouldn't have at least hurt her as well? I talked to all 3 boys at one point or another that year when I found their Instagrams. I don't think I talked to the oldest, but I tried to get in contact with no luck. My classmate didn't really want to talk about it, but I tried my best to console him out of doing stuff. The youngest ran a whole account for his mom and would post just about the same picture every time he was missing her. I think he even wrote a book about it. I have no idea where they are 5 years later, but I don't think they're in PO anymore. The mom was sweet, and her boys were very good kids. None of them deserved this. I hope the guy that did this gets what's coming to him. This happened about 8 years ago. This is about my friend. I've known her since I was 15 years old. We'll call her A. We were coworkers for about 5 years, and when I turned 18, we became roommates. Her boyfriend at the time also lived with us. So A was always kind of different. She was very religious and always talked about God. And she struggled with partying or smoking, without feeling guilty about it afterwards. We would throw house parties. Nothing too crazy, just a group of us playing beer pong, drinking, and maybe a little bit of smoking. Nothing ever crazy happened, but literally after every time, she would have to tell me she can't do this anymore, that she needs to focus on her relationship with God. Yet, the parties were usually her idea, but I got so used to her being like that I just thought that's her personality. Okay, so after about a year of us all living together, her boyfriend decided to break up with her. They were together since high school, and he's about 3 years older than her. So when this happens, I feel like this is where the chaos started. She starts to see therapists and a psychologist because she went into a severe depression. I'm not really sure what doctor decided to put her on Adderall, but she tells me that she's been diagnosed with depression and ADD. I really didn't think much of it because I've known a few people that take the same medication, and it seemed to help them. After a few months of her being on this medication, she drops a lot of weight and becomes way more spontaneous and did things that were pretty out of character for her. For one, she became very promiscuous. She would drive to San Diego, which is almost 3 hours away from where we live, to have one-night stands. It wasn't until another few months after that I started to notice something was really off. She started sleeping with one of our coworkers and got oddly jealous if anyone would just talk to him. We all worked in the same department, so we all kinda had to talk to each other. I asked him if he could grab something from the back, and I turn around and she's just staring at me with this angry blank stare and says, "I know what you're doing." What? I said, 'cause I literally had no idea what she was talking about. "I see the way you're looking at him. I know what you're trying to do." Are you being serious right now? Please tell me you're joking." "I see it. You can't lie to me. I know what you're trying to do, and I won't let it happen." So by this time I was so pissed off that I left work and went straight home, 'cause she was 100% serious. It didn't freak me out as much as it pissed me off. I've known this person for years. We live and work together. How could she think that of me, let alone treat me that way? So after that, things got so bad with her. She was always accusing me of all kinds of bullcrap. One minute she'd talk to me all friendly, then the next accused of me being in her room going through her stuff. Eventually, I had to move out, and she went back to living with her grandma. We still worked together, but I asked to work different shifts if possible. Then, I didn't see her for almost 6 months. She just didn't come back to work. No one would tell me why or anything that happened. It was almost a year when I got a Facebook message from her asking me if she could see me and talk. So much time had passed that I wasn't really angry. I was just worried. I wanted her to be okay. So by this time, I now live with my husband. So I tell her she can come by my apartment. When she showed up, I could hardly recognize her. She had put on a lot of weight and it looked like she let her hygiene completely go. Not to the point that she looked homeless or anything, just very noticeable, especially from how she used to look. So I just kinda knew she had gone through something. She didn't want to come in, so we just went for a walk, and she begins to tell me what happened. She said that she had been diagnosed with schizophrenia. Apparently it was drug-induced by the Adderall. I guess it all started when she went on a hike with her family. She said that her dad turned into a demon and he was going to hurt her. She tried to run away, but her family had to restrain her and call the cops. They had her held for 72 hours. She said it was like God gave her the ability to see who was a good person or bad by just seeing them as demons or as people. She told me she takes medication for it now, and she's going to this Bible study group that has really helped her. I told her that's great and that I'm always here, and I can't imagine what she's gone through. So we start to hang out a few times after that. I go to her apartment once or twice a week just to hang out and talk. It was like assisted living, but for people with mental disorders. I never thought of her as dangerous because, well, she was on her meds, and from what I've read and heard, schizophrenics aren't usually violent. Plus, she seems somewhat well. After about a month of hanging out though, she keeps trying to get me to go to this Bible study group. I tell her that I'm not really interested in that, but she eventually becomes ridiculously persistent, randomly stopping by my apartment trying to get me to go. So this is where I slowly stopped coming by because it was like every minute we hung out, she always brought it up and just wouldn't let it go. About a week goes by. I didn't really talk to her or answer her calls, and if I did, I just came up with an excuse as to why I couldn't come by. A part of me felt bad, but it was like something was telling me to just distance myself for a bit. The following Friday, my mom calls me and she asks if I read the newspaper. She tells me that A is in the newspaper. The very night before, A's mom stopped by her apartment. I guess that she was very upset and disoriented. Her mom tried to calm her down, but she couldn't, so she tried to call the police because she was getting more aggravated and aggressive. A ends up chasing and stabbing her mom 7 times. Come to find out later from her family, she had stopped taking her medication because God told her she didn't need them. She thought that her mom was trying to hurt her and that she was a demon. Believe it or not, her mom actually survived this and was able to make it to the neighbors. I guess the police found A wandering around her apartment complex with the knife still in her hand. They said that she wouldn't talk to anyone. She just had this look on her face like she wasn't even there. When the police took her away, she didn't struggle or say anything. To think if I didn't distance myself, that easily could have been me. The thought of her being so violent never ever entered my mind. It's just a really scary and honestly heartbreaking story. It's almost as if I had to grieve for her because who she used to be no longer existed. She just really didn't deserve that kind of life. This happened a few years ago in a city in Ontario. It was the middle of winter and my best friend and I were leaving a house party at 3 a.m. Now, I like to smoke the green, but for some reason, I had this feeling at this party that I needed to stay sober that night, which I never feel the need to do. The house the party was at was on the main street in this city. I'm not kidding, it was literally called Main Street. We leave the party and are walking up the main street, on the left side of the street towards a parking lot where I left my car. As we pass a side street, a guy in his early 20s approaches us asking us for directions to the clubbing street in my hometown. We directed him into the clubbing area, but he kind of lingered as if he expected us to walk with him. We just stayed and waited until he started walking in the direction of the parking lot before we began walking behind him because we didn't want to walk with him. My friend, who was really buzzed at the time, just kind of stared and then asked me, "Why does he keep looking back at us? And who's he talking to on the phone?" I thought she was just being paranoid, and I told her not to worry about it. He was probably just looking at us because he wanted us to come to the club with him. This is when things got crazy. All of a sudden, a man in his 40s began jogging in the middle of the empty main street parallel to us, at the same pace we were walking, holding a German Shepherd tightly to his side. He kept looking at us and nudging his German Shepherd, as if to make it more agitated or riled up. At this point, we start to realize something is very wrong, and begin speed walking towards the parking lot. As we approach the parking lot, I look behind us to see if there's any way we can book it back to the party, and as I look back, I see the 2 men come out from behind a store that sits at the beginning of the parking lot. I then make eye contact with one of the men who comes out from behind the building, and he looks me dead in the eye and then smiles. And "I'm gonna chop you up into tiny little pieces" kind of smile. At this point, we're freaking the heck out now. 1 man in front of us, 1 man with a dog to our right, 2 men behind us, and to our left is the parking lot where I left my car. As we turn into the parking lot, the younger guy in front of us stops walking and then turns back around and doubles back into the parking lot. They all begin yelling to each other as a dark blue van in the lot turns on and rolls down the windows, yelling back to them. As they all begin to circle us, we finally made it to my car. Now, this will forever be the reason I believe I have a guardian angel. I had actually parked my car 3 parking spots before the van that turned on. As they realized that we were getting into a car, not cutting through the parking lot, it became clear they had all not anticipated this. As I was fumbling trying to find my keys, they all kind of froze for a second trying to figure out what to do. As I unlocked the car and we got in, they then circled the car and one of the guys hit the front window, actually yelling,
"Where do you ladies think you're going?"
I have never freaking pulled out of a lot so fast in my life. I momentarily debated if I should try to run one of them over. We drove away and I called 911 immediately after. Long story short, they ended up having us come in for a police interview, as 1 week prior, a woman had been abducted by a van with the same description, before being brutally assaulted at some random house for an entire night, then being dumped on some side street by these messed up men. What freaked us out the most about the entire situation was how planned and calculated they had been. They had found a young guy to pretend to ask for directions. We figured out after the fact that he probably wanted us to walk with him so he could suggest cutting through the parking lot, then have grabbed us when we passed the van. Bottom line is, stay safe. After this incident, I don't like to walk around at night at all if I'm not with at least 3 other people, and preferably a man. It's so scary to me to think that even if we had figured out what was happening and knew basic self-defense, we still wouldn't be safe because really, what can 2 girls do against 5 men and a German Shepherd? Seriously, everyone, be careful out there, and always watch your surroundings. Hey everyone, thank you for taking the time to listen to today's video. I really hope you enjoyed it. If you have your own personal scary story or experience, be sure to submit them to my website at southerncannibal.com. Stay safe everyone, and remember to always stay hungry.